Thank you everyone for tuning in to this tutorial. My name is Ryan Howell. I'm a current UAS instructor at Kansas State University, Salina Aerospace and Technology campus. So this is just going to be a quick tutorial on how to integrate a working Python script into a script tool. So it's not really a Python tutorial. I'm assuming that you already kind of know enough about Python to be comfortable in the ArcGIS environment. Just basic Python and ArcPy, that you have some familiarity with that. So just basically, script tools are useful for any script that we plan on reusing and that we want to parameterize. So it's easy to share with others who may or may not have a good understanding of Python, or even just they don't have a good understanding about the tool that we created. It's a lot easier to basically create a geoprocessing tool similar to any tool that they would already be running in ArcGIS than it would be to share, lines of code and expect them to know how to use that. So if you'd like to follow along with this tutorial, you can download the data. A link to download will just be in the description for the video. When you download the data, it will look something like this. So I have a Scratch workspace. This is just a NP folder that we'll be storing our data in. I have the solution. So this is the completed Python file, as well as a toolbox that has a script tool that references this completed Python tool or Python script. So this is what you will be creating throughout this tutorial. And then I have a half-finished Python script that you will be manipulating if you'd like to follow along. And then I have a shape file that just has a single point, this red point right here, that we will be using in our example. Okay, so the first thing, let's take a look at our Python script. So we just right-click on that. We'll edit with Notepad++ or whatever your preferred text editor is. So if you're familiar with Python, you can pause it if you like for a second and look over the code. But basically what this code does is it will create two buffers that use a specified length for each. It'll create a larger buffer and a smaller buffer. It will erase the smaller buffer from the larger buffer, and then it will delete the intermediate data. So if we take this, if we copy it and paste it into our Python window, then it should work. You might have to adjust the file paths if you are following along at home. But this is basically what it does. So it creates a little donut using the two buffers. So for this example, let's say that we want to create a tool where you can do this based on different points and different buffer distances. Okay, so that's something you do a lot in your job, and you want it to be able to run this, over and over. So let's pull up the script again. Or sorry, before we get to that. So in order to create this script tool, the first thing that we need is a toolbox. So if we go to our catalog, so this is the folder that you'll download, and we're just going to create a new toolbox. So right click on it, select new, and then toolbox. We can name it whatever we want. I'm just going to call it tool. That's what I called it last. My last attempt at creating this video, and I guess it saved stuff. So now that we have a toolbox, then we can create a script tool. So right click again on the toolbox, select new and script. And I'm just going to call this donut buffer. So the name is what the tool is actually called. The label is what it displays as. Donut buffer. So the label will take things like spaces and special characters, but the name will not. And then obviously you can add a description, anything else you want to do. The parameters tab, we'll get back to this in a second, but the execution tab, we'll go there next. So this is where we actually add our Python file. So if we just search for the files and go into the file that we downloaded, then we're just going to add this cam_python file. And then, so that will bring that in. You'll notice that the code, it's not parameterized. It still has the file paths and everything, but it's got the code there. The validation tab, we're not going to do anything with this in this video, but this is how you can add some more complex operations to it. So for example, if I wanted to add the option of having a third buffer, then I could set it up in here so that if you added a distance for a third buffer, then it would add more parameters that you could add values to. But if you didn't add that third parameter, then those wouldn't show up. So that's an example of some of the kind of more complex things that you can do. I honestly haven't done a whole lot with this tab yet, but there's stuff online. So going back to the parameters tab, so this is where we can go through and parameterize all of our variables in our Python script. Okay, so all that we're going to do is we're going to delete our file path, and we're going to call the arcpy.get parameter as text, and then index it, starting with 0. And then we're going to copy this for all of our variables. And then adjust the indexes properly. So starting at 0, going up sequentially. Okay, so now instead of having set values for each of these variables, it's going to get those parameters from our script tool. So our first parameter is our input. So if we go back to ArcGIS Pro, so this is our input points. And it's really important that you know what data type you're using. So there's a lot of them here. I won't go over all of them, but this first one, so it's a shapefile or feature class. Our second one is our output location. And we're going to change this to a workspace. So that will accept a folder input or a geodatabase. And then we have our output name. We're just going to leave that as a string. And then we have our buffer distances. So we have our large buffer is buffer 1, and then our small buffer is buffer 2. So the first one is large buffer diameter. So for this one, a string would probably work, but I'm going to change it to double. So that we'll accept a number value that could hold a decimal. And then the same thing for the small buffer. And then our last parameter is our units. So this is our buffer distance unit. So we're going to leave this as string. So we could do nothing else and then just have people type in what they want their unit to be. But you can obviously see that there would be problems with them doing that if they type something in wrong. So we can control what their inputs are. We can create a drop down here under the filter option. So if we click there, then we can do value list, and then we can just add whatever values we want. So we can do feet and meters. And then, you can add more if you'd like to, but we'll just do that for this example. So if we click OK, then over here in our toolbox, we have our script tool. So if we double click, then there we go. There's our tool. So we can go ahead and run it. Cross our fingers that it works. So there's our input points. Our output location is Scratch Workspace. Our output name will just say output shape. And then our large buffer diameter will say 10. And our small buffer diameter will say 4. And then our buffer unit will say we'll do it in feet. Oh, good. It appears to be working. Okay, so this should be in our Scratch Workspace folder. I'm not seeing it, so let me pause it. And oh, this is exactly what I did the last take for this video. you have to save your file when you're done running it. So because this tool is directly referencing that text file or that Python file, you don't have to do anything else. You can just run it again. And that time it worked. So if we expand or refresh our Scratch workspace, there's our output, and there's our donut. Okay. So now I'm going to show you a couple of ways that you can improve the tool a little bit. So if you right-click on this and go to Edit, then that's how you edit the code, if you'd like to. But we're going to edit the properties first. So the first thing actually that I want to show you, so here where you upload your script file, once you get everything the way that you want it, if you click this button right here, then you can embed the script into your tool. So that breaks the link between the script tool and the Python file. So you can't make any easy edits anymore like we just did. But if you wanted to share the tool with somebody, then you also only need to share the toolbox with them, and you don't need to worry about the Python file. So let's go into the code. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a validation. So if you think about it, what happens if our smaller buffer is bigger than our bigger buffer? Then our math is not going to be right here in the erase buffer tool, and it's going to cause problems. So we're just going to add in a quick if statement. So if buffer2 is greater than or equal to buffer1, then we are going to add an error. So that's just arcpy.add error. And we're just going to say small buffer is greater than large buffer. Okay, so that's basically a print statement that will show up in our tool. So let's try this out. So let's make this 2 and let's make this 6. So if we click run, then the tool fails. If we look at the details, so small buffer is greater than large buffer. Okay, so that worked. Let's go back to our tool. Sorry, don't need to do that. Let's go back to our script. So now let's add some messages. So if you add print statements, then they're not going to show up anywhere. So especially if you're trying to troubleshoot something, then using the arcpy.add message is useful. So just arcpy.add message, and then our message will be creating buffers. And then this one is erasing buffers. And then this one is deleting intermediate data. Okay, so let's change this back so it'll run. So now if we look at the details, it printed creating buffers, erasing buffers, and deleting intermediate data. So if you have a really long tool, or like I said, if you're troubleshooting, then that can be useful to identify where your problems in your code are. So the last thing that I wanted to show is, so what if we wanted to give them the option to not delete the intermediate data? So to do that, then we just add a parameter. We'll call it delete intermediate data. The data type will just be Boolean. So this will create a checkbox. So the values will be either 0 or 1. And so by default here, it's unchecked. Sorry, before we do that, so let's show you where that would go in the code. So if we go right here, so if, let's say, we'll call it delete is equal to 1. So we also need to add a parameter. So we'll call it delete. So this one, we don't need to do get parameter as text. We can actually just do get parameter. You can Google that a little bit more to get the differences if you're interested. So we have another variable that it's pulling the value from the script tool. And then if that value is equal to 1, or if it's true, then it's going to delete the intermediate data. If it doesn't, then it's going to keep the intermediate data. So that's what we did here. So we set that up as a Boolean. So by default, the box will be unchecked. So the Boolean value will be 0, so it will keep the intermediate data. If we wanted to switch that so that it was true, so by default, it deletes the intermediate data, we just scroll over to default, and then we can just put 1. I say that right. So now if we pull up our script tool, then we have delete intermediate data here that you can check or uncheck. And in the interest of time, I won't show you that, but you can try that on your own and see if it works. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope that this was useful for you.